Tonight we're pleased to welcome Chris Leslie-Hynan back to Iowa City to read from his debut novel, Right Around Shining. Benjamin Hale says, Right Around Shining is a West Coast 21st century Gatsby, warped through the lenses of class and race and class, and similarly obsessed with those very American anxieties of money, ambition, and authenticity. This is the best and one of the bravest novels I've read in years. And Joshua Ferris says, Right Around Shining is brilliant. Sure, it's about ballers and their chauffeurs and fame and wealth and celebrity and race, but its subversive soul is interested only in one thing: the hunger, both yours and mine, to swallow the world whole. It feels like an instant classic. Chris Leslie-Hynan grew up in Wisconsin. He attended Carleton College and the Iowa Writers Workshop, where he received teaching, writing, and Michener Copernicus fellowships. His fiction has been published in the Harvard Review, Joyland, and the anthology New Stories from the Midwest. He lives in Portland, Oregon. We're very happy to have him here tonight. Please welcome Chris Leslie-Hynan.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming. It's very, very nice to be here. This is the last stop on my book tour, and certainly one of the most anticipated. I loved my time in Iowa City, and it's a great pleasure to be here reading for y'all, and especially for Sam, and most of all for my parents who are here tonight. So, if you hate it, don't boo me, just find me later, we'll work it out. Be nice. I'm just going to read from the first chapter, so there's really nothing to explain. This is called Right Around Shining. In the summer before the come-up days, when it was still all new, 3 tufts of smoke hung in the high air over Khalif's place, where the party was. They were pink and slightly scrawny, and looked equally like spent fireworks and signals of distress. They looked like excess, they looked like trouble, they looked like boasting and simple information. He disagreed on his first contract extension, and though the team wasn't bound to it yet, Khalif must have felt he had a new $32 million behind his desire to entertain. Here the party at, his smoke seemed to say. Down here, swag be phenomenal. I could see the pink blooms from the main road through the trees. I imagined that beneath them young men were walking between Khalif's outdoor court and his rose garden, in bright suits as dapper and occasionally horrifying as the ones they'd worn on draft night, mingling with U of O guys up for the summer, in our city's pittance of rappers, in coral pink topcoats and ice cream shoes, while Antonia sat high above, behind a shut window, like an inscrutable damsel waiting to be rescued from a distress no one could name. I'd just begun with the Wests, so I didn't know yet what I wanted more, to be down with him or up with her, and I sped toward the house in no hurry to discover it, hoping only for another day of model servitude that would worm me a little deeper into their mutual life. I'd been watching Wimbledon when Antonia's message came to come get her out of there. I sent back right off that it was my one day of freedom. I didn't capitalize, so I'd come off angry, but of course I was pleased. All that summer I was thinking of her and trying to spend my days off very classy. Until the weather turns, it's a good time of year for doing it up just so. You can wear a lot of nice linens that time of year. You can drink peach and pineapple juice with all your meals. In the late dusk, you can walk down to Jameson Square, amid gleaming new buildings with the names of old royalty, like you're on your way somewhere. It changes when the rains come, and by fall I would be sick of aspirational living and wistfulness in the simple emotions of summer. By then I'd be waiting for the wet to make the city swell with its sad, potent energy and rot it with black moss. Though I would come to do many things for the Wets, my official title was chauffeur. I was given an overgenerous weekly salary and the charge of an entry-level Jaguar, which I liked all the more for not being my own. I liked having to keep it mint, and I was honored and a little confused that Khalif would let me garage it at my own place. Nothing in my upbringing suggested I'd enjoy a Jag a day in my life. When I was young, I wasn't rich enough to have one, or poor enough to want one. Not with the purity of the kids who really came up from behind the scrub grass, who could enjoy the symbol of 4 wheels in the driveway, gleaming out harsh American success without irony. I came from the great white middles, and we could enjoy nothing but our sensible lack of gaudiness, supermarket steak, and football on the weekends. This is a terrible fate, and I think I envied something about every other class of American. This envy took more than a quarter century to manifest itself, though, as from an early age I was pretty preoccupied with my own unremarkable intelligence. I more or less raised myself, with the help of a few teachers, and I quickly fixated on the shared vision of my future we created together in their cramped offices, wherein I was raised from my depressing station to theirs through the miracle of public education. When I used to hear about cars and parties, I'd tune it out with the singular focus of a young man with a wrong idea about himself. I assumed I'd arrive at the fruits of my self-denying, perpetual student, can't-afford-it-anyway lifestyle in some kind of second-hand Corolla that smelled like acid-free paper in the absence of lust. I'd done a lot of English and American studies, but it was only when I discarded all that for different studies that this story begins. I took the surface streets because I'd been back just 5 weeks after 2 years away, and the city still glowed with the living nostalgia of homecoming, and because I wanted to make Antonia wait. Already I look forward to rescuing her from something everyone else felt lucky to be at, picking her up beyond the edge of the city and holding the door for her indolently, telling her, "No, ma'am, it was no trouble at all," in the sweet put-on voice I used to keep up the appearance of concealed bitterness. "I guess you had to come a ways," she'd say, and I'd let a sullen look flit across my face before I assured her it was not so very far. It seemed best to nurse an imaginary grudge, to mask the gratitude I felt that they'd opened their lives to me so readily. About 7 miles south of downtown Portland, along the west bank of the Willamette, lies the Dunthorpe neighborhood. It's small and forested, and doesn't look like a neighborhood at all. Even if you find your way among the subtle hostility of sudden turns and dead ends to the properties with a river view, there isn't much to make you anticipate the homes of athletes and other young and limited gods. Most of the team live 15 minutes away in West Lynn, just down the 205 from the practice facility, where you didn't need pink smoke to get your city friends through the politely discouraging landscape of a neighborhood designed for exceptionally chalky white people. Khalif lived next to the McCalls, and the guy who invented Linux. I pulled the car into the drive, descending from the road amid trees so tall and serene they made me want to know their names. The first sign I wasn't in a national forest was the open security gate. Just beyond it, the line of monstrous cars began. There weren't any Hummers. They couldn't be parked downtown anymore without being defaced. But there were plenty of steroidal trucks and enough black Escalades for Prince's motorcade. As the drive neared the house, the paving shifted from oil-dark blacktop to bright white gravel. The tires made a rush of white noise, a sound both antiquated and timeless. As I turned into the circle, I could almost see the ghostly grooves of carriage wheels. A woman in a vintage store dress was sitting on the steps. I pulled the car up alongside her, but as I slowed, I saw it wasn't Antonia. She too was small and frowning, and white, but she was a northern girl, with skin like skim milk and a tattoo of a fox head on her calf. Her eyes were very blue. She was holding a cigarette in a strangely protective grip, her wrist cocked so the cherry pointed back at her. We were maybe 6 feet apart. The window was down between us, and we looked at one another a moment in accidental intimacy. She seemed to be waiting for a pickup, and part of me wondered if she'd just get in the car. I remember taking in the look of her mouth, Her canines were slightly sharp, and feeling a strange, instinctual dislike of her, a feeling of threat, combined with the sense that if she did get in, I'd accept it and drive off without a word. She'd tell me where she wanted to go, and I'd ignore her, waiting for my nerves to tell me what I'd do next. All that summer I'd been having moments like that. I'd become mysterious to myself, open to everything. She lifted the cigarette and the moment passed. I remembered myself and felt my hand go up to my tie. I thought you were someone, I said. She shrugged her bare inward shoulders. You aren't... What? I asked. Someone called someone for me. A cab, I thought. But maybe it's you? I'm for someone else, I said. I shut off the car and came around. I'm for someone else, I said again, and went up the steps and into the house. Out back, the billboard faces were everywhere. On the patio, Lamarcus Aldridge was cooking a line of meats on a blinding grill. He too was wearing a t-shirt and ball shorts, as were seemingly everyone comfortable in their status, with only here and there a man like myself, wearing a tie like a slim form of permission. Aldridge popped a bright spatula from hand to hand and called out, "Turkey burgers, turkey brats, turkey steak," in a stadium vendor's voice to no one in particular. On a pedestal in the corner of the patio, a 10-foot ice sculpture stood gently melting in the sun, in case the casual dress should mislead anyone about the legitimacy of the celebration. She looked like a gleaming justice without her scales, sword and all, though someone had burned a hole in the palm of her empty hand to hold a blunt. She was getting freestyled to by a semicircle of guys who looked like the backfield of a college football team, though ducks or beavers I couldn't say. While I watched, a guy in a lavender hoodie stepped up and rapped something containing the phrase, "Nigga nail a bitch like a telephone pole," to general approval. "Don't say that word," I said, under my invisible breath. No doubt the lavender halfback wouldn't care to be censured by the white help, but just 5 weeks with Khalif, together with my standard lifelong white boy fear of the N-word, and got me pretty attuned to which ends were being used organically to strengthen the patois, and which were just bad rap filler and objectionable to men of any color. On the outdoor court, children, who seemed to belong to no one, played a violent game of 21, screaming so urgently at every foul that I imagined them McCalls next door, pausing on the way to the pool, shifting their grip on their blow-up fraps, and listening intently to determine if a child's murder were occurring. Joel Prisbilla stood in front of the basket, looming gentle as a birch tree, softly plucking up whatever air balls came his way and redistributing the rock to the lesser children. In the Japanese garden, a dice game was on, in the raked sand. I stood on the footbridge and watched the koi pass beneath me, imagining a monk clenching his fists in outrage. Yet as I came closer, the tiny austere dice seemed an extension of the blank beauty of the landscape. 3 guys in the whitest imaginable t-shirts stooped around the roller, while a man who looked like a young Julius Irving stood holding a sheaf of bills. "You want crap, son?" "I'm just watching." After a moment, the roller swore, and the men stepped back for him to stand. "White boy always want to watch," he said. He was older than the rest, and his thick face seemed familiar. "You fuck up my roll, white boy." "You know you ain't used to rolling on no cat litter, Jay," somebody said. "Sorry." "You come in here stirring up my chi and shit, you best roll yourself," the older man said. "I never done it," I said. And for a second I took in nothing else, only listened to the echo of my own voice, its new, sure sound. Almost as soon as I'd come to work for Khalif, I'd grown tired of my bland, white talk. "It's all right," the older man said. "Step in, I'll fade you." As he dropped the dice into my palm, I placed him. He was one of the old jailblazers. He hadn't been with the team since the late 90s, and I couldn't imagine he lived in Portland. His most remembered remark about Oregon was the opinion that they were probably still hanging black people from trees not 40 miles outside the city. And the team had known he was there, they'd have sent some PR men to kidnap him, so eager were they to distance themselves from the bitterness of his misbehaving era. Now he was just a thick-set, permanently angry has-been with a rap sheet, but in high school he'd been one of those black figures who entranced the suburbs with all we were not, and I'd practice his between-the-legs dunk whenever I could find a low enough hoop. I knelt by the garden, rolled a 7 almost immediately, got strong-armed into a double or nothing, and rolled another. I got up $40 lighter and full of the conviction that my people had been sitting in the good chairs for so long that any game that involved squatting put us at a disadvantage. Still, I felt a strange excitement in kneeling in the billow of those immaculate shirts. I remember a long gold chain brushing the back of my neck and how I shivered. Turning back toward the patio, I was hailed to try some turkey steak, and then a new voice hollered my name from the balcony. I heard the crack of a shot and saw a bright flash going at me. Something hit me in the chest and rebounded, and I dropped, holding the burning place. Having never before been shot by something so bright, I rolled away from what struck me, fearing another stage, until I came up against the feet of one of the dicers standing firm. I rolled back and lay on the footbridge, trying not to writhe, as a happy chorus of profanity went up around the yard. My body told me nothing, but I could feel in the air that I had not been shot really, not respectably, not with a bullet or anything. Already I heard bits of muffled laughter, and after a moment's relief at the promise of more life, I began to feel angry that I'd been shot by some party weapon, and was not even close enough to death to distract people from their drinks. I'd been but trifling wounded, possibly for the pleasure of the crowd, and I was left now to lie among them as a feebly trembling figure of injured dignity. If blood had suddenly begun to spurt from my chest, I would have felt a certain relief. Next to me, the blinding core of the flare smoked and grew small. "Damn, son," Khalif cried from the balcony over the disorder. He stood at the rail, the flare gun in his hands and Antonia by his side. He had on a plain blue plaid shirt and a pair of aviators he sometimes wore, like a comic prop, whenever he gave me orders. I hope they soothed him. The sight of him looking down on me like an amateur dictator only stoked my hot and disoriented humiliation. Antonia looked absorbed in something some sparrows were doing, in a distant place. "You're stepping all over this place like the family circus, kid," Khalif shouted down at me. "What'd I pay you for?" I felt more feet around me, and the dicers helped me up. As I brushed myself off, one of them crushed the flare's last embers beneath his shoe in a final gout of pink. There was a ragged hole in my shirt, just above my heart, and by the evening I'd have a quarter-sized welt I'd wish looked more serious. I walked unsteady and stunned through the parting crowd, trying to look like my nerves were not twisted into fine fibers of hate. Once I even felt myself smile knowingly, as though this had all been a practical joke we'd been planning all week to throw a little sizzle into his party. I tried to tell myself that this was just a bad turn of an expected sort, that I'd fought for this sought-after job in a high-life world, knowing that in its careless, loud dazzle, sometimes the chauffeur got shot, for no reason at all. But seething with pride and shame, I could not sway myself with the conviction that I was less a man suffering the indignities of his job than a debased functionary of a failing empire. I felt that it was somehow correct, that I deserved it. For who can complain about being shot for being white people? And so I came under the shadow of the balcony and looked up at this man, my master, and his wife. "Next time, just wait with the car, okay?" Khalif had dropped his voice, but I knew it still carried to every ear that wanted to hear. "We got cameras here. We know when you're here. You don't have to call nobody. You don't have to go and look. We know, okay?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good. She'll be down in a second now. Next time, just wait." "Yes, sir." He sniffed in a tough way, and the violence was through. "Listen, I didn't mean to hit you or nothing. This thing always buck and shoot high." I didn't know what to say to that, what absolution I could reasonably give. I just waved my hand a little as if to say, "Oh, did you shoot me?" He sighed, and for a moment seemed truly sorry. "Yeah. Fuck you gonna say, right? You need some Neosporin or something? A bandage? You eat?" The aviators came off, and he turned his head incrementally to include Aldridge. "Fix him up a VLT real quick. Man's gotta eat." I felt my posture relax, but the fibers of my neck were only twisted tighter by the shame of this reprieve. My nerves seethed, and it occurred to me the next time I did something wrong, he'd cane me, and then hand me a half-drunk, lukewarm strawberry soda to show everybody he was still a good guy. "Maybe he wanted turkey steak, Leaf," Aldridge said, popping the spatula from one hand to the other with a special panache. "What is that made-up sounding shit?" "Prime cut, Leaf. Pure, 100% prime cut turkey steak. Ain't nobody want that. Make Odin eat that. You leave Jess alone with that South Beach shit." "Maybe I want it," I heard myself say. Something in me hoped he'd rise to this, but he only turned away. "Trust me, Jess," he said a little tiredly, his voice going away from the rail. "You want that BLT." "Yes, sir," I said, because he'd stepped away and would not hear. I went off to the nearest bathroom to raid the medicine cabinet for ointments and pain pills and hope my wound looked graver in the mirror. When I returned, an overstuffed BLT was pressed into my hand by an underling, and I was made to recount my entertaining experience next to Lady Justice, who was melting unevenly in the sun. "Could have been worse, home," one of the rollers said. "Could have been Jason Williams. Man had the whole world." "I've been shot before," I said. I wasn't about to abide my burning as being an excuse to talk about other people who shot people. I could see Khalif coming toward us, filtering through the crowd one complicated gesture of brotherhood at a time. "Nail gun," I said, elaborating. "BB gun, too." They did not seem impressed. "Got a fish hook of my scalp once," I added. The men turned to me and laughed. "A real nature boy," one of them said, draping his arm around me. "Give him a real squeeze. Shit, boy's been beat up his whole life." Just as Khalif broke through to us at last, the man wrapped me in a full bear hug. I took a bite of BLT over his shoulder and chewed it calmly, but as Khalif came near the justice, I lowered my arm and returned the hug fully, swinging into the embrace and then out again, maneuvering the larger man toward the sculpture until I felt his shoulder strike it, and then stepping free. The justice slid easily from its pedestal, and as I watched it drop toward Khalif, I felt again a slow wonder at my strange new self. As the justice tipped sunward and came free of her base, I saw Khalif lift his hands and freeze, and felt my wonder chilled by a distant remorse. She had to fall. There was no way around that, and yet, having brought it off, and so neatly, I now wished myself on the other side of things. I wished I could be the one to rush forward and throw my body against the ice to keep him safe from harm. The justice fell with the dignity of something elemental, as if she were slipping unnoticed into some Arctic sea. She fell sword first, and gathering his weight, Khalif twisted awkwardly at the knees and sprang away, as the man who'd hugged me looked over his damp shoulder, dumbfounded. She hit the ground, and I remained a moment longer to savor the crash. But instead of the million splendid shards I'd hoped for, she only cracked in two, and fell into an unremarkable rubble. For the second time that hour, a cry went up among the crowd, and I saw Khalif clutch his knee, and lingered in spite of myself, to see what I had wrought. But as the men rushed to attend him, he shook it off and straightened again, joining the crowd and looking for someone to blame, and I turned quickly away and slipped into the house. Thank you. So, George Saunders is fond of saying the first person to ask a question in the Q&A is inevitably the person with the greatest sexual energy in the room. So, yes, sir.
In that case, I'm very enthusiastic to read the first question. Obviously, I need to tell you this is a very courageous project you've undertaken, and so I wonder, in writing the African American vernacular speech in particular, I assume you must have run that by African American friends and perhaps responded to their suggestions about how to make it more. I'm just curious about what those interactions would have been like, assuming there were some.
There weren't. When I started this book, I had just graduated from here, and I guess I was pretty young and pretty confident. And I think that although it's not done as often, I think writing across race is something that's doable. It's very hard, and I think and hope that I did it very carefully. But we have to write across a lot of things, and we have to write across class, and more often we have to write across gender, and we have to write across age if we're going to write anything like that. And I think maybe age and gender are the hardest. But if I were to write a book about a 70-year-old man at the age of 28, I don't think anybody would ask me that question, even though it's often done and maybe not done optimally. Also, I would say that during that time, The Wire was very, very popular TV show, The Wire. And we would sort of all gather and watch it. And I think that it's probably true that some white writers took some solace or had more confidence after that, because that's something where, there's a whole spectrum of characters, many black characters. The show is generally written and run by a white man, and I think that he did it so well that we felt a little emboldened, maybe.
Oh, could I ask Chris about Khalif's wife's name?
Yeah.
How you chose her name?
Is it a big, complicated Willa Cather reference? It's not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
I just have never heard it pronounced that way, and it doesn't mean people don't. I just was not aware that.
Yeah. I had to actually try to get myself to pronounce it a different way, a certain point into the writing process. But I couldn't do it. I don't know. I gave up. I mean, you wouldn't think that Khalif's name, as it's spelled, would be pronounced like it is either. So I was like, well, I'm just going to go with that then.
But I got his pronunciation from the book. Or at least
Yes, yeah, there's a point where it explicitly tells you that it's not Caliph, where with her it's sort of up in the air.
Because I was surprised. But I also just
Sorry,
wanted to
Antonia.
I also just wanted to say you read beautifully.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And after hearing you read that chapter, I realized I read way too fast.
Okay. I kind of couldn't tell how quickly I was reading. Hopefully it wasn't excruciatingly slow or fast. Yeah?
I'm interested about your character development and the dialogue. So when you're writing, do you have a good sense from the beginning to end of exactly what the characters are like? And how do you make sure that these characters who come from a different life than you do, how are you sure that their personality that you're showing is sort of consistent throughout the book and it's not just going all over the place?
Well, that's kind of hard for all of them, isn't it? I don't know. I write a lot of drafts, I guess. It's not a very long book, but I wrote 9 drafts from the beginning to the end, and it just sort of, hopefully, as you iterate and write more and more, they gradually, the parts of themselves that are not faithful to themselves kind of fall away, and a more coherent, rounded character presents itself. Hopefully that happens anyway. Yes.
I'll go along with the gentleman who said that you read well. After I've read the entire book, and now I have to go back and read it and try and read it as you were reading it, because it has much more meaning listening to you. But the question I actually have is, in the darker moments of the book,
Mm-hmm.
you have, in some ways, you've defined, I think, what a lot of us think of sometimes the rich black basketball player. And yet, in some ways, that's also a caricature. And I'm just wondering, what a black basketball player who doesn't fit that model might think of your book. Did you think about that at all?
That model being
Well,
like a stereotypical model?
Yeah, I think it is a bit stereotypical. Not totally, but I think that there is a stereotypical piece in there.
Well,
Maybe not. I mean, you
Maybe.
obviously don't think so, but I
I just can't write sort of from that perspective.
Yeah.
He's not stereotypical to me anyway. And I guess I I'm enough of an observer of basketball and of sports and a fan of them that, I don't really see that sort of archetype. Even if it's there, I just kind of know, I know all the players too well. I've read too much about them, so they don't really reduce in my mind to sort of, I don't know, if I was like 10 years old, whatever I thought of Michael Jordan when I was 10, that was probably like kind of some sort of basic stereotype. But now that I'm older and I can kind of see all the players in a lot more nuance, so hopefully that nuance gets into the book in some way. But I guess there's sort of like a fundamental archetype, I guess, where the athlete is someone who is pursuing this sort of lifestyle. This, baller lifestyle is now a word that means both of those things at the same time.
Right.
And there's a way in which, Jess, as someone who feels like he doesn't have access to that aspiration to live this kind of gilded life, sees all the players enacting that in a way that he envies. And so there's probably a way in which like he sees them doing what he wants to do and makes a little bit of an archetype of it. Like they get to enjoy this thing which he feels he does not.
Yeah, I think that I understand, that the perspective is from his perspective,
Yeah.
That's a good explanation.
It does all come from Jess, who is, while initially conceived as a partly like semi-autobiographical character, is also a bit of a creep and a voyeur and a lot of other things that I hope that I'm not.
Did you start with kind of the theme of race first as your main inspiration, or like just the story and like the concept?
The story and the characters and the arrangement between the three main characters mostly. I mean, I don't know where I would go if I was like, well, I think I'm going to be a right person and write a book about race, and then like not. I don't know like where that seems a little vague. I don't know where I would go from there. But I found this dynamic between the three characters really compelling. So that was sort of the origin.
Hi. I was just wondering, I don't have a very good question, I guess. But I was just curious, Right Around Shining,
Yeah.
that's a Clips reference,
Yes.
right? Thank
Yes.
you. Okay. Quick follow-up question then. What did you think of My Name Is My Name?
I haven't heard the record in its entirety. I actually had sort of stopped listening to that Clips album, but I was having a very, very hard time with titles. And this book had like so many mediocre to terrible working titles that I refused to discuss. That one day I just sat down with my iTunes and like I looked at every single song that I had. And like that was the only one that popped out as a potential title. And so after that, the album had sort of a renaissance, and I do listen to it a lot more now. But I didn't call it that because I was like a huge Clips or Pusha fan, although, that I have sat in my apartment and tried to rap his guest verse on Runaway like several times. But yeah, you're never hearing that either.
Thanks.
Hi. I saw a couple reviews that compared your book to Gatsby, and I was wondering how conscious you were of those parallels during the writing process.
Yeah, probably the biggest review that the book's had so far. It talks a lot about Gatsby, and Fitzgerald is very formative to me. I mean, if you grow up in the Midwest, ambitious and wishing to write lyrically, especially to write lyrically so that women will like you, you're gonna like fall under the Fitzgerald shadow really quickly and firmly, especially if you're like 19 or 20 or 21. So I would say that Gatsby is sort of the most formative novel for me. But I do think it's overstated in that review. Like they found the one woman in the world who could overstate The Great Gatsby's influence on me. And she did, but I'm still grateful for the review. More or less.
I can't remember where I read it, but someone had written kind of bemoaning American authors having trouble winning the Nobel Prize for fiction. And this person who's bemoaning this their analysis was that American writers are being taught to write what they know. And since it can come off as a homogenous group of 20 to 30-something white guys, this is giving Americans trouble winning the Nobel Prize for fiction. So my questions are, what do you think of that analysis broadly? How do you apply that analysis to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and how do you apply that analysis to your book specifically?
All right. Oh, we're all making that same, like, she's getting her money's worth noise right now. I really can't speak to that until I win the Nobel Prize. So I'll get back to you in a few lifetimes. Let's see. Well, I think, how shall I begin? I think the conception that writing what you know is not the same as writing bravely is false. And I think that the idea that workshop culture, especially at Iowa, teaches you not to write bravely is also false. What was the third part of that?
Well, this is a book that parts of this book are taken from your life.
Yeah,
And huge parts of it are not.
clearly are not. Yeah.
So is that something you're are you in future works, are they gonna have semi-autobiographical characters as well, just to be grounded in personal experiences?
Right, yeah, probably. I don't know, there's a way in which I guess I owe a lot to starting this book kind of young, and kind of naive, maybe even a little deluded and full of hubris. Because if I hadn't begun at that point when I thought that now that I had a master's degree, I was a master, I could do anything, I wouldn't have arrived probably at a book that was quite this bold. So I think that, it's important for every writer to, maintain that boldness, even when it seems irrational, I guess. Why would I have any business writing a book about race? I couldn't answer that then, and I can't answer it now, but I just kind of did. And that, that heedlessness can be valuable.
Chris, how important is or was Portland to the book? Would it have been the same book if you had chosen to live somewhere else?
No, I never wanted to move to LA and write the great Kobe Bryant novel, because, I lived in Portland before I came out here, and I live there again now, obviously. And there's a way in which our city's connection to the basketball team is very special, because we are such a white city, and we only have one major sports team, and it is often primarily made up of black players. And there was this time right when I moved there was the Jailblazers era, which was kind of referenced in the book, where we had a very talented team, but we didn't quite make it, and then lots of guys on this team got arrested, and then the city kind of turned on them, and there was a racial aspect of this that I found very creepy and compelling. So I think that, Portland's fraught, sort of masked racial history was something that fed into the book. I couldn't have said it in any other city.
Hi, I just have a question in response to, can people hear me? In response to the question this woman asked.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that it's fair to say that you're not writing what you know? I'm not sure if that's what you're implying, but I'm wondering if you've had people address that, because you are a white man writing about black culture,
Right.
and I can see people making that claim, but I want to know how you feel about that, because it seems like it's a culture you're relatively steeped or at least engaged in. So how do you feel about claims like that?
Yeah, I feel like every version of the statement, write what you know, has become a mantra at this point. Write what you know is a mantra. Write what you don't know is also a mantra. Write what you wish you knew is also a mantra. And maybe it's that one for me. The book begins at a place that I do know well, which is I guess me being in 8th grade and feeling for some reason completely compelled by the UNLV Running Rebels basketball team, even though I had no knowledge of athletic culture, black culture, urban culture, anything like that. but that's still so mysterious to me, like why I did that or what caused that to be. So we just sort of set out into the heart of this mystery within ourselves, and then, you know, we're faced with certain challenges with like portraying this world, which we don't know. And I don't know. Is it a cop-out to say like that's where the magic happens? It's a cop-out. I know I shouldn't say that, but you just try your best, I guess.
You said it took you 9 drafts to write this. How long is that exactly, and what made you finally decide that it was done?
They took it away from me. I started it in the fall of 2008 after I graduated from the workshop. And, you know, going back, I'm not sure like what caused me to decide like a draft is, you know, 6.1 instead of 5.9 or something. Like it's sort of random on some level. But it did seem to take me a lot longer than I thought it would take me. Like I thought I was just gonna leave here and, you know, have early success or something like that, and that's not what happened. So yeah, I guess it needed all those 9 drafts. I think there's another part of your question that I'm forgetting.
What finally decided you? How did
Right.
you decide it was finished?
Yeah, well, it had reached kind of a baggy length for it. It's not very long. It was like 340 pages or something. And I still didn't have an agent, but I knew that I wanted this guy to be my agent like very badly. But he was like, cut 100 pages. And I thought that was crazy, but I was like, well, I'll try my best. And I cut like 80 and finally got him to come around to being my agent. And then after that, all the drafts were sort of, I mean, they were with someone. I did one more draft with him and then 2 with the publisher. And that's all there was time for before the book was going to come out.
Oh, another comment I wanted to make about the book, Chris, was I thought it was incredible how quickly you dropped us into the story in the beginning. I was very impressed by that, and
Thanks.
made it kind of uncomfortable for me.
This comment comes from a very proud father. And autobiographically, there was a point in time many, many years ago where I coerced Chris into having to go to a basketball camp for a 2 weeks period of time. He went kicking and screaming, but perhaps that's part of the motivation for the story. Amen.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks for making me go. I really didn't want to go. I cried a lot, I remember.
More questions or comments?
Behind you, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talk about early success and you talk about how young you were, etc. when you started the book. But I'd like to hear how you feel that your identity as a writer has evolved since, say, 10 years ago, and where you think
Really?
it is now. Yeah.
Oh man, 10 years ago. Well, I have started reading people who are alive, and I think this has been important because, like, as a young writer, I was really, like, astoundingly pretentious, and I thought that the living had like nothing to give me, no value. I couldn't learn anything from any living writers, which is hilarious, and maybe it was helpful. I think that being very wrong about certain things can at least help differentiate one from other people who are wrong about different things than you are. So I think I started wanting to be like this extremely sort of singular prose stylist in the style of various dead modernists. And I think the last 10 years has seen me like sort of creeping toward where other good writers of my generation who aren't as deluded are at. And I don't ever want to lose that kind of early desire to, I don't know, be really singular and or dead. but I think it has been helpful. I guess I've learned to connect. I felt like it's what I learned in the workshop, was that going in, I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to connect. And coming out, I sort of did slightly now know how to, like, when I laughed, they now kind of laughed with me a little bit more, and when I cried, they like cried with me a little bit more than before, which was not at all. So that's been the last decade. Yeah.
So where do you go from here? What's next?
I'm going to write a novel about gambling, because that's what I did to pay my rent during the writing of the book. Was I played poker, which was a very odd thing because I didn't learn that until I came here in grad school, and I'm not very good at a lot of like basic poker things, like say math or aggression. But that's where I ended up, and I do it reasonably well now, and I've run into so much material through these years, and I fear that if I don't try to turn it into art in some way, I'm going to have this like degenerate period that I'm going to feel bad about myself for. So I'm going to try to write about gambling. I told you. We'll talk about it.
More questions or comments for Chris?
Hey Chris, I found the first person POV to be really compelling. Just wondering whether or not you went into this knowing that it would be in first person, whether you write normally in first person.
Yeah.
I think it works for this project.
I have written mostly in first. This next book is in third person, and I'm enjoying it. But this book is so about the narrator and his self-deception and his problems. So I felt that the first was really, really an attractive way to do that, because I don't know, it's what I had the most experience with, and I feel that there's nothing like a really like juicy narrative voice that's also sort of it's got a lot of the good and the bad and the creepy and the deluded, and he wants to be liked by everyone and by the reader, and so there's a way and he's sort of like pleading for empathy, but he just doesn't deserve it at some times. So that's something that I felt had to be in the first. Yeah.
More questions, comments?
This is just a very personal one, since I'm a good friend of your mom's.
Great.
Did you have any trepidation about her reading the book?
Oh yeah. Can we end on that one? That was, yeah. Yes, I did.
The book is Right Around Shining. Let's thank Chris Leslie-Hynan.
Thanks so much for coming.